Hello, and welcome to another video. In this video, we're going to be going over optimizations for Star Wars. Do note this is also optimizations for other games, especially older games. This will be done live, or in real time, I guess you could say, so there will be quite a few mistakes, so I apologize. Also, I'm going to give you guys a disclaimer now. I'm not suggesting any changes that will actually harm your PC, so if you're ever to mess with something called regedit, which, by the way, if you're experienced, you can use it, but I would recommend against it mostly because it's not necessarily worth it most of the time, and most of the optimizations you actually get out of it, it's not worth it. So, for example, when you mess with regedit, you get stability issues, and with Windows updates, sometimes you get corrupted Windows installation. You don't want that because that can lock you out of your computer. And generally, I don't feel like the warnings are good enough, so I'll give you a quick rundown. So let's say you change something in regedit, you don't have a backup, you don't know what the original number was. It can slowly start corrupting your Windows system. Let's say you have a Windows update, it can update and maybe it just fails. And all of a sudden, you don't have access to the internet and you don't know why. Really weird bugs happen when your Windows updates fail, especially when regedit has been edited. Sometimes you can do it with certain things and you'll just never have an issue. Obviously, it's just sometimes bad things do happen, and if it can happen, it probably will. So it's better to be safer than sorry. Obviously, always have a backup, or at least the USB drives that you can boot up Windows installation on. So just take that with a fair warning that if you change certain things, especially in regedit, which is not recommended, you could have these issues. Pretty much everything that I'm recommending to you does nothing like that. The overclocking section, which obviously I'll give another disclaimer for, is also something that could really brick things if you don't know what you're doing. So I don't recommend it to anybody that doesn't understand how it works or really understands anything about it. At least not with, some sort of experience or understanding that you could completely brick your system. So going into the first thing here, Windows Beta or PC Manager. I'm totally sorry if you guys were like totally chilling in the dark here. I just brought this super white screen up because it totally just flashbanged me too. But this is a way that you can get rid of memory leaks. So for example, if your memory usage is really high and you've got a lot of temporary files, you can use this. You can open this, you can hit boost, and it'll get rid of all your temporary files that are currently happening. So when a memory leak happens in Star Wars, for example, you can use this. It's very nice. It's much like ISLC, not completely the same, but it does a much safer version of what's basically going on in ISLC. ISLC is a little bit more complicated to set up, so I don't recommend that to most people. So this is a easy alternative. It's also directly from Microsoft, so it's very trusted, and it also has a smart boost option, and then also has some antivirus stuff, cleaning up your computer, health checks, stuff like that, directly from Microsoft, which is great. So you don't have to worry about the, I guess, safety of this program compared to like some of the other ones I might recommend. So for example, Intel has came out with a new thing called Intel %on. The reason why you would want to use this is for not only benchmarking, but understanding what your bottleneck is. So whether your GPU is holding you back or your CPU is holding you back. Chances are it's your CPU, just so you guys know. This video is incredibly informational. I would highly recommend watching that if you're even like slightly interested in bottlenecks and understanding what's holding your system back and what you can do to improve, and also just to see your frame time and your CPU time. Obviously, optimizing your frame time and your CPU time and reducing input latency overall. Highly recommend this program. And then obviously going into DirectX 9, obviously kind of missed this. So this is probably the first thing that you should do and the easiest thing for you to do. I've been recommending this for quite a long time. I even recommend Vulkan last expansion, even though in theory it may not have been completely legal, but it technically wasn't really breaking any rules either. It wasn't like changing animations, or a lot of people that actually changed their animations never get punished. That was actually breaking the rules. What Vulkan did was just change the way the game launched. It didn't actually change files, it just changed the way it launched. Now, Vulkan is not very useful, so don't even bother using that right now. And the loops that you would have to jump just to make it work just isn't worth it. 64-bit client is a lot better than the 32. So getting into why DirectX 9 is so important to get in comparison to other things and why it might help you the most is because DirectX 9 is a older file. Most people don't have DirectX 9 still installed in their computer. Not to tell you exactly how old DirectX 9 is, but yeah, it's the reason why there's a 2010 right there. So getting into that means most DirectX 9s, or not DirectX 9, but DirectX that we use today are only emulating this version, if that makes sense. So that means emulation obviously is not perfect. Everybody knows emulation is not that great. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. So when it comes to like graphical like things, when you're emulating graphical things, it's probably not good for your performance, right? Like that's not super crazy to think about. So basically what happens, emulation, not good. So download the files, don't have to emulate anymore. It has the files to grab from your own PC. And that gives you like an immediate uplift in performance. So what you would do is obviously click right here, open a new tab, download, bam. What you would do with the download, you would make your own folder, put it in there, extract all the files into that, and then run the dx setup exe. And once that's done, you're pretty much done. Just keep those folders, or keep that folder of files somewhere, whether it's on your desktop, whether it's on your documents folder, doesn't matter where it is, as long as it's on your operating system somewhere, you're good. So don't put it like on your external hard drive. And then when you launch Swtor for the first time afterwards, it will be laggy. So just accept that. It's not because you downloaded something that's going to make your performance worse. It's just because it's loading all the shaders for the first time, at least the proper way. Because before it had to emulate it. Now it doesn't have to emulate it anymore. It's going to be a little bit laggy. And then once it's finally loaded, it will pretty much be a lot smoother. So anyway, going into other things, this is another thing. I had made a short about this long before she posted this, but this was another issue. Like if your frame rate, if you actually have a higher refresh rate monitor, you definitely want to check your refresh rate through Windows settings and NVIDIA settings, or AMD settings if you use AMD GPU, and obviously change it in game. And then let's go into like things that might give you the tiniest bit of updates. So obviously update your drivers and your BIOS and stuff like that. Be careful with your BIOS. You want to make sure that you do that securely and safely. Make sure that you have a wired Ethernet connection. Don't use Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi is part of the issue with inconsistency with internet connection. So really try not to be on Wi-Fi. Debloating and reducing background activity. There's a lot of apps on your computer that you probably don't need, and there's a lot of things that are probably running in the background that you probably don't need. So I would go through and probably uninstall a lot of things that you don't use, but also make sure things aren't running in the background when you don't need them. Then going into temperatures, I guess. So one thing that I know a lot of people don't really care about or don't pay attention to is temperatures in your computer. Like how hot is it getting? Do you have fan curves set, or are you trying to optimize the temperature for your computer? This is something that's really important because thermal throttling exists. And if you get your PC too hot, it does have its own protection system, so it'll shut off by itself. At least most PCs nowadays do. And on top of that, when it gets too hot, it's going to start throttling itself. So it's going to reduce its speeds to reduce temperature. And that can be a severe bottleneck in performance. So it is very important to dust out your PC and do it safely, and also just try to keep your temperatures down in general. Even if you're gonna knock down the speed just a little bit for better temperatures, it's worth it because then you don't actually ever get throttled. You don't want to be throttled. It's not good for your performance. And then when you go to play Star Wars, playing in full screen is optimal for input latency. Just for example, for most people, depending on what your setup is, just going into full screen should cut your input latency half. That's a lot. For example, it cuts 3 milliseconds for me, which is a little bit more than half. It's very noticeable when I'm not playing in full screen. Then going into experienced users. So if you're not very tech savvy or anything like that, you can feel free to just close this video now. There's nothing really more that I can offer you to help with your performance outside of obviously looking into your power settings, which I guess I could do that real quick before we get into experienced users. Power settings. Make sure that you're at least unbalanced or prefer maximum performance. And also, totally forget about this one. Game mode. Turn game mode on. Make sure Star Wars is actually recognized as a game. Prefer maximum performance for your GPU. And then also, when you're in power saver mode, basically what it does is it saves power and it cuts your performance. It limits your performance drastically. Don't be in power saver mode. And then when you're looking at power plans, try to make sure you can go into advanced in that and see what your max processor speed is set to. If it's set to like 95 or 75 or 85, I don't really know. It sometimes can be set to 95. Go ahead and change that to 100%. And you can leave your idle to like 5%. That's completely okay. Though if your computer is underclocking itself while you're playing, which is not too hard to check, that might be a cause for concern. Which thankfully that one leads into another thing that I'm about to talk about. So this is going to be where advanced users starts. So if you guys are only looking for advanced kind of like stuff, obviously this would be our starts. But also at the same time, you know, if you don't understand tech that much, probably avoid these because these can kind of get dangerous if you don't know what you're doing. So boost lock. If you have any idea what that means, basically it means it'll lock your cores. Like say you do all core overclock, it'll pretty much run at the same frequency, not stop. And then also there's one for GPUs. There's a boost lock for GPUs. The MSI Afterburner has it. EVGA has it. The reason why you would ever turn this on is to prevent your thing, or not your thing, but your GPU or your CPU from underclock when you're playing games. Sometimes Star Wars would not be recognized as a game on my system. Therefore, obviously, it wasn't using enough of my computer / GPU at the time that you could boost lock it and make sure that you're always getting the best performance, even if the GPU or CPU doesn't respect the game as an actual video game. That was a big issue with 32-bit. Not so much anymore. You can overclock your GPU. That's very good for frame rates and also in general for other games. A little bit less so this game, but it obviously does help. That is the most performance impacting thing that you can do. And then obviously overclocking your CPU. This is going to be the most important for Star Wars because it's a CPU bound game. So the higher that you can get your single core clock, the better. So something like PBO or PBO2 is very good. You don't always need like the maximum speeds, but if you can boost to pretty high, so for example, mine goes to 5.1 gigahertz, which is pretty good. And then XMP, so basically what that means is overclock for your RAM. That's very important. Sorry about that. I do not want to sneeze, so I don't have my mute anymore, so I need to keybind that. And then going for BIOS updates, it's definitely a little bit more dangerous, so do try to make sure that you do all these things with at least a backup or understanding of what you're doing. You don't want your temps too high. You don't want to set the voltage too high. If you suddenly set the voltage too high, chances are you can actually damage your components. If the temperatures ever get too high, just revert your settings, save your settings before doing anything, even if you're experienced. Make sure your refresh rate is set. Sometimes it doesn't register since the 64-bit update, but also you may have just forgotten to set it. Then obviously game mode on, and then there's also some monitors do have game mode too, so you want to make sure you have game mode on your monitor actually on. That'll reduce input latency. So for example, my monitor has that. You can disable HPET, which is high precision impact, or event, if I can speak English, high precision event timer. You don't have to do this one, but this one is just something that I would recommend just because it's a performance hog sometimes. So basically what happens with HPET is that you would just go into device manager, you'd find it and then disable it. You look up a video on that and understand why you would do it and why you would do it. Definitely recommend doing a little research about that on your own if you're unsure. And then obviously going into your like GPU and whatnot, like GeForce Experience, there's some settings for your graphics card, so you can change those. Make sure your power mode is not set to power saver. Make sure it's for maximum performance. Also tweak your settings there. I would recommend probably finding a dedicated video for that that explains each setting a little bit better. For the most part, you don't need to have everything ramped to performance because GPU is usually not your bottleneck. So sometimes you can actually go for settings that actually make the game look better and not really see any FPS hits. Disable Xbox related stuff and game bar. Game bar is not useful. You do not need any of the Xbox stuff, so uninstalling and just disabling it unless you're actually using Xbox through like with your PC. There's no reason to even have it. Disable Steam overlay and notifications. Obviously don't do this if you actually use them, but for the most part they do actually tank your FPS, so just go ahead and get rid of them. High resolutions really tanks FPS unless your GPU is very good. So I would say if you play 1080p, sometimes not having a high enough resolution can cause a different kind of bottleneck, and having basically the ability to use NVIDIA Super Resolution, for example, to increase your resolution can give you better FPS, but sometimes it's just not worth it because it makes the game blurry. So sometimes actually even upgrading to 1440p monitor would be worthwhile. And then ultimately, obviously a smaller resolution is usually sometimes the best move, especially if you have a GPU bottleneck, which obviously if you use Intel %mon, you'll be able to find out whether it's GPU or CPU. And then obviously if it's not your GPU that is the bottleneck, you can obviously ramp up your settings. This is why I play on Ultra, because bottleneck for me is my CPU. Pretty much no matter what you do, you'll pretty much always have a CPU bottleneck. And for the most part, there's just too many effects and abilities and animations just going off all at once. And it's all reliant on your CPU. So think of like a 16-man raid or 16-man PvP, obviously 8 versus 8. Everybody's hitting their buttons. There's probably like 150 different effects and buffs and debuffs going off for like each individual player, including the animations. That becomes a lot of stuff to just suddenly load. So that is a CPU thing, and they'll pretty much just not be able to fix that unless they reduce the amount of stuff that's going on. That's why low Bs and mid Bs feel a lot better performance-wise. Other than that, I think I'll cut the video here because we've been talking for a long time, and there's not really anything else I can add here. There's obviously some other optimizations that you could probably do, but for the most part, there's not like anything crazy that I have missed. These are the ones that I personally done and the ones I would recommend to you guys. I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day and a happy new year.